Muslim women across the world, Sri Lanka is no stranger to that, are always, like, we've always been spoken for, right? We're spoken for or spoken about. And it was very important for us that every single reform that is being considered under the Muslim Marriage and Divorce Act center the lived experiences of Muslim women who are most affected by this law and who are most affected by the Qazi court system, but also that the voices, the demands for reform comes from Muslim women themselves.
In Sri Lanka, Muslim communities are excluded from the General Marriages Registration Ordinance, and Muslims can currently only marry under the Muslim Marriage and Divorce Act. Reforms to the MMDA, a law enacted in 1951, have been advocated for by Muslim women for decades now due to the law's shortcomings with regard to the autonomy and protection of Muslim women and girls. Key concerns include the lack of a minimum age of marriage for Muslims and the prevention of Muslim women from signing their own marriage documents. In June 2021, an advisory committee on Muslim law reform submitted its report on the MMDA to the Ministry of Justice. The report identifies and advises on key areas within the legislation that require reform.
And the fact that there is no legal age of marriage for Muslim children in Sri Lanka means that Muslim children are not protected or don't have the same protection of their rights as non-Muslim children in the country do. In Islam, marriage is a solemn contract between two parties, and two parties enter essentially into a contract in which they both consent. But Section 16 to 19 of the Muslim Marriage and Divorce Act, which refers to the nikah and the registration process, does not in any way make it mandatory for consent of brides to be obtained. Essentially, the Muslim Marriage and Divorce Act doesn't even give Muslim women the equal provision to enter into marriage as a partnership of equals, but treats women as minors even upon the entry into marriage.
Additionally, the Act discriminates against and compromises the Islamic rights of Muslim women in the circumstances of polygamy and divorce, and prohibits the admittance of women as qazis or judges in Islamic family courts. According to lawyers and activists, the MMDA's outdated provisions have posed and continue to pose real-life risks to Muslim girls and women.
குழந்தை திருமணங்கள் அல்லது சிறுவயது திருமணங்கள் என்று சொல்லப்படும் பொழுது எத்தனையோ வழக்குகள் வந்திருக்கின்றன. குழந்தையினுடைய தந்தை குடிகாரராக, குடிப்பழக்கத்துக்கு அடிமையானவராக இருக்கின்ற சந்தர்ப்பத்தில் தான் வாங்கிய கடனை திருப்பிச் செலுத்த முடியாத சந்தர்ப்பத்தில் 12 வயது, 13 வயது, 14 வயது பிள்ளைகளை திருமணம் செய்து கொடுத்த அல்லது திருமணம் செய்யாமல் காப்பாற்றிய சந்தர்ப்பங்கள், வழக்குகள் கூட இருக்கின்றன. அதே போல ஒரு மனைவியை பொறுத்தவரையில் விவாகரத்து செய்யப்படும் பொழுது அந்த மனைவிக்கு தெரியாமலேயே விவாகரத்து செய்யப்பட்ட வழக்குகள் இருக்கின்றன. அதே போல ஒரு மணப்பெண்ணினுடைய கையொப்பம் என்பது இந்த திருமண சட்டத்தின் கீழ் கட்டாயமான தேவைப்பாடு இல்லை என்பதனால் கணவனும் மணமகளின் தந்தையும் கையொப்பம் வைத்து மணமகளுக்கு தெரியாமலே திருமணம் முடித்து வைத்த பல வழக்குகள் கூட இருக்கின்றன. இவ்வாறு ஒவ்வொரு பிரிவின் கீழும் உதாரணமாக சொல்வதற்கு பல வழக்குகள் இருக்கின்றன.
Despite several efforts to amend the law over the years, the recent submission of the Advisory Committee's report to the Ministry of Justice is the furthest that MMDA reforms have come to being implemented.
You can't sort of pin down one reason as to why it didn't materialize. There's always sort of a multitude of reasons that contributed to it. I mean, different pressure groups, the way that it was handled, the absence of a sort of a steel will to push it forward, and changes of government. So every time there was always a different reasons why it didn't happen. So this time though, it is fitting into part of the wider justice sector reform program. So the MMDA is one of those reforms that were identified as something that had to be done. In the wider picture of women's rights and gender equality, I think it's about time that we looked at those in terms of prioritizing non-discrimination and equality. We can't sort of put those as second-tier priorities and say, no, but this says this or this interpretation says that. I think its primary duty of the state is to protect its citizens equally, and it's even enshrined in our constitution, like I said, under Article 12. So if you can't be given that, then the legal system or the constitution is of no use.
Although Muslim women's groups and grassroots activists have been leading the fight for MMDA reforms for decades, many remain in the dark about the specific recommendations in the recent report.
This committee, which is a 10-member advisory committee, it comprises of 8 men and 2 women. We know 3 of the men are from religious backgrounds and are religious scholars. There are no community women's activists on the committee. And very little is known about the committee deliberations or its final report because it has not been made public. And the report is of really high public interest because we want to know whether the experiences, views, concerns, realities of Muslim women have been adequately addressed, both in what the committee submitted to the Ministry of Justice, but also in what the Ministry of Justice himself is going to take on and then put into the amendments of the MMDAs.
முஸ்லிம் பெண்களும் சிறுமிகளும் இந்த சட்டத்தால் பாதிக்கப்பட்டு இந்த சட்டம் திருத்தப்பட வேண்டும் என்று 40 வருடங்களுக்கு மேலாக இந்த கோரிக்கைகளை முன்வைத்து வருகிறார்கள். இந்த சந்தர்ப்பத்தில் அந்த சட்ட திருத்தம் நடைபெறுகிறது என்பது ஏதாவது ஒரு பத்திரிகையில் வெளிவரும் பொழுது அல்லது அது தொடர்பான வெளிப்படைத்தன்மையோ அல்லது அந்த சட்டம் எவ்வாறு திருத்தப்படுகிறது, அந்த சட்டம் எந்த திருத்தப்படுகின்ற நடைமுறை அல்லது செயல்முறை இப்பொழுது எந்த கட்டத்தில் இருக்கிறது என்பது தொடர்பாக எதுவித வெளிப்படையான தகவல்களும் கிடைப்பதில்லை, தகவல்களும் இல்லை. இது நீண்ட காலமாக போராடி கொண்டிருக்கும், தங்களது உரிமைகளுக்காக போராடி கொண்டிருக்கும் பெண்களுக்கு செய்யப்படும் அநீதியாகத்தான் இருக்கும்.
In addition to the committee report, the Cabinet of Ministers has decided on 4 key issues that are part of the requested reforms. Namely, that the minimum age of marriage will be 18, that the consent and signature of the bride be obtained for any marriage, to prohibit polygamous marriages for Muslim males, and to abolish the Qazi court system. So far, the Ministry of Justice has offered no concrete timeline as to when the reforms proposed in the report will be implemented.
As of now, given the report was handed in very recently and there's a bit of work to be done because the report still has to be implemented by turning it into the law. As far as the legal processes are concerned, when it comes to any legislation, you have to look at the cabinet approval for the specific legislation. Once the cabinet approval comes, some cabinet approvals are with draft, some of those are without. Then you're looking at the draft bill being prepared by the legal draftsman department. And that bill is then checked for constitutionality by the Attorney General's department. But then, of course, it goes to the bill stage of Parliament. It's the first reading, and then so on. Then at that stage, bills are open for review by challenge by the Supreme Court under the Constitution. So there are different stages in which not only this, but of course any bill will be subject to with regard to passing into legislation.
While MMDA reforms remain in process with the Ministry of Justice, Muslim women are hopeful that they will not have to wait much longer to be regarded as equal citizens under the law.
It's also important for us as Muslims because there is injustice and inequality that's happening in the name of our religion, which we cannot accept, right? And primarily because we are Muslim and we believe in the equality and justice that Islam not only promotes, but also requires us to stand up for. It's necessary that then the family law that applies to us also, fully encompasses this principle of equality and justice for Muslim women.